What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Huddle on this, the 17th day of April. We had our first two NBA play-in games last night. We had the Pelicans lose. They now go on to face the Sacramento Kings, who beat the Golden State Warriors in fine fashion, and the Warriors all but done. Klay Thompson all but done in Golden State as well. We're going to talk a little, very good usage of the womp womp sound effect. We're going to go into a little bit of what it means to bet the NBA playoffs as well as the NHL playoffs, with all that coming up. I am, of course, joined by my co-host, Tony Farmer. Tony, how's it going today, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. We had a great episode last week with Oakland A's pitcher Andrew Carrigan.
Yeah.
Next week, we've got Mr. Irrelevant, Ryan Hogue, good friend of the show, coming back. And then sandwiched in between those two great guests, like you said, we're going to talk a little NBA, NHL, NFL draft talk, of course. So it's a good time to be doing this work with you, my friend. I love it.
Yeah, a really great episode. So check that out if you haven't last week with Andrew Carrigan. And like Tony said, big NFL draft sort of preview and best bet show next week with Ryan Hogue. Real deep dive into the draft and some of the players and some of the betting value that still exists on the board. It's evolved into such a deep market over the last, 2-3 years, let alone 5-10 years. Number one, obviously a bit clear cut if you believe the hype. And even, I don't know, what would you say? We're going to talk about it later on, but what would you say? Like top three probably known at this point, would you say?
I would say so. And that's actually a talking point I had for you, because that chalky top three that you're talking about is minus 140 right now. Okay. Do you like that? I think minus
140, I do like that. There's still a good value there. And I mean, we're talking, now the question is, because JJ McCarthy getting a lot of hype in the last few weeks, are we talking Caleb Williams 1, Jaden Daniels 2, Drake May 3?
Yeah, that's the chalky. That's what I'm referring to as the chalky 1 through 3. Yeah, and I think there's good value there at 140. But yeah, a lot of hype on McCarthy. I'm a little more skeptical than most on him going 4, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll talk about that here at the bottom. Crazy. I know you're not a golf guy, Tony. Just a crazy run of sports, and I mean, it's evergreen content. We talk about it every year, but we had the Super Bowl and the NFL playoffs. Then we get into March Madness and how much fun that was. And the women's side as well of March Madness. What a great year for them. And then it's straight into the Masters. Scottie Scheffler, a fantastic performance there at Augusta. And now it's into NBA and NHL playoffs. But before we get into that, Tony, we had the WNBA Draft earlier this week. Just another feather in the cap of women's basketball, of women's sports. Caitlin Clark, obviously, the boom that she has brought to the women's game cannot be, I mean, it's numbers we haven't seen really, but ratings for the WNBA Draft, Tony, 2.45 million viewers tuned in to watch the WNBA Draft. And my question to you, what is the previous high in TV ratings for the WNBA Draft?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, boy. 500,000?
So you're pretty close. Last year was 572,000, just for comparison. The previous high was 600,000 in 2004. That was the Diana Taurasi draft.
Did you see Caitlin Clark on SNL?
I did not, no.
All right, worth a view. I won't spoil it too much, but long story short, Michael Che on the Weekend Update segment has had some jokes where the WNBA and women's sports in general have been the punchline. So they rolled some of those clips, and then Caitlin essentially got her opportunity to roast Michael, and it was pretty good, man. There's some zingers in there. I don't know if she wrote them herself. I probably not, but it's really, really good television.
That's amazing. I have seen some of those Michael Che jokes, especially as March Madness was ramping up there. So hilarious. I got to check that out to see how Caitlin claps back on those. But yeah, I mean, and I know it's a unique draft class. There's so much talent in that WNBA draft. But again, here we are talking about another watermark for not just women's basketball, but women's sports, man. Like, it has ballooned in popularity. This, like, 2023, 2024 especially. Like, remember the Nebraska indoor college volleyball game that they had? Like, about a year ago, it must have been. Like, that did crazy attendance numbers. It's wild.
Yeah, it's more opportunities for bettors, which I like. The NBA draft thing is kind of surprising to me, even though, you know, there's this momentum, because you kind of knew where she was going to get drafted, right? Like, there wasn't a big surprise.
No secrets.
Yeah, but people still, the appetite was there to see something that was a foregone conclusion. Everybody knew it was going to happen. So that's pretty darn impressive, really. Yeah,
that's a really good point. Now, the important thing is that these numbers continue through NBA TV in the next season, and then next year's Women's March Madness. And I know we've still got a couple of really good players still in the game, so fingers crossed that they can continue that trajectory on the women's side of things. But NBA and NHL playoffs ramping up. They start, I mean, we've had the play-in games in the NBA. I don't count that. Like, playoffs start on Saturday. So I'll start with you, Tony, as the sort of, like, you know, you are obviously big into college football, you're big into NFL, but then you sort of love betting the NHL as well. So in your opinion, and like just your experience down the years, what is it that is different about the NHL come playoff time that separates it from the regular season? And what are some things that bettors should pay attention to when they're looking at whether it's game by game or series markets or what have you?
I think first, certainly look at the different ways that you can bet the NHL playoffs. You got the series prices. You got the series prices with a spread. You know, do you think this team's going to win by 1.5 or 2.5? The correct outcome. Exactly, this team wins 4-3, and then the series total. But shop around. If you like a team plus 2.5, you like a dog in a series, Andrew, aren't you basically saying that you think that's going to be a longer series? So you can kind of compare those props at the same book and say, where is the value here? If you have conviction on something going to happen, I like this dog, look and compare those within the same book, and then obviously at other books as well. I think that's really important. NHL, physical sport, be aware of injuries. If we have some time later in the show, I can go over some injury updates from a couple teams. There's a couple teams that are expecting guys back who haven't played in a couple weeks or a couple months even. And so that's an important thing to be aware of. You may say, oh, this team didn't look good down the stretch, but they were without a couple important depth pieces. Certainly important to keep an eye on. This one is pretty unique to me, Andrew. A lot of people disagree with me on this one. You may disagree with me on this one. I like teams who have played in a lot of overtime games. I feel like overtime games are a little more gritty. It's high pressure, so it's sort of like mimicking a playoff-like atmosphere. I think you learn a lot about your team when you're playing in overtime games. And so teams that have had success or played in a lot of overtime games during the regular season, I tend to look a little bit more at. And then home and road splits with NHL, you know, the home ice advantage is a little different than other sports. Some teams don't have a huge home ice advantage. Some really do. And in the playoffs, it's a little bit more juiced up. Those fans are a little bit more excited. So certainly teams like Colorado and Vegas, who are known as having those pretty raucous environments, something to be mindful of. And are teams dependent on their home ice advantage? In other words, is their record inflated because they're such a good home team, and so you may want to fade them when they're on the road? And lastly here, goalies. Goalkeepers. In baseball, when the MLB playoffs roll around, we talk about how it's all about starting pitching depth and how some starting pitchers get moved to the end of the rotation. With the NHL, you may have two goalkeepers who are pretty evenly matched. One of them gets hot in the playoffs and the team sticks with them, or they had a rotation, you know, throughout the year, 2 or 3 goalies, and then they stick with that premier good goalkeeper throughout the playoffs. So I tend to give a little bit more of an upgrade to teams that have a dominant goalkeeper in the playoffs.
It's interesting you actually mentioned that about a team that has a little bit more experience with some regular season overtime games, because you're right, like overtime sort of mimics that, you know, uptick in intensity and uptick in aggression when it comes to the playoff games that we are going to see come playoff time on Saturday when we get these series underway. Last year, Tony, we had the Florida Panthers sort of, come out of nowhere to make that deep run in the playoffs. And this is something that we do see certainly in the NHL playoffs, and something that does make it so awesome and such an interesting watch every season. But is there a candidate this year that can sort of, do what Florida did last year, a sort of long shot contender to consider this season in the Stanley Cup playoffs?
Andrew, I'm going to submit my application to you right now. In the past, we've had teams on this show that you and I have gotten behind, and I'm submitting my application for your approval. Okay. Can we get behind the Islanders? Ooh. That's my team. Okay. I know. Cringy. They've got a negative goal differential. I get it. There's a lot not to like about the Islanders.
A little bit of a boring approach to hockey as well with that team. Not the most exciting team to watch.
Very, very, very fair point. And I'm stuck in the numbers, and you're looking at the game on the ice. So that's a good comment there. But here's why I like them. They were left for dead earlier this season. Fired their coach. There is this almost us against the world mentality with this team right now. We've seen it with other championship teams and other sports in the past, whether it be the Patriots the first time they beat the Rams, or the Giants when they beat the Patriots, or the Red Sox when they were the idiots. It's kind of like us against the world, and they've got a chip on their shoulder. And I think that's the Islanders right now. Love their coach, love Patrick Roy. I think this is a team that's hot right now. They're streaky, Andrew. They've had a 6-game losing streak earlier this season. They had a 7-game losing streak earlier this season. They've also had 2 6-game winning streaks. So if I'm going to take a shot at 50-1, give me that streaky team who could make me lose silly, but hey, it was a 50-1 shot. They made me look silly, too bad. But they could also get hot and make me look really good. So if there is a dark horse, a long shot in this playoffs, I'm going to go with the Islanders, but it sounds like I don't have your vote to get behind them.
I cannot get behind the Islanders. There's a lot of legacy stuff there with me and that franchise. One guy who will, obviously, is Michelle, our NHL writer here at oddshark.com. He is a diehard Islanders fan, so it'll be interesting to get his perspective on that as well. Do we know how many matchups do we have set? Do you know? Like, is there anything available yet in the NHL in series price markets?
Yeah, some things I've taken a look at that I put some small bets on here. I think the Rangers are a pretty safe bet against the Capitals, minus 450. Panthers, minus 170 over the Lightning. Islanders, plus 280. There it is, over the Canes. I know you might not like it, but I'm liking that one. And then how about the Jets, plus 115 over the Avalanche? They're 3-0 against Colorado this year, and you can get them at an underdog price. And how about this? They outscored Colorado 17-4 the 3 times they played them this year, and you're getting them at a dog price. I think that's worth looking into. And I mentioned earlier, we've got these teams that are dependent on their home ice. Colorado is one of those teams, and so they're not going to have home ice advantage. So I like the Jets here, plus 115.
Love that one, actually. And I will throw back to you that the Jets should be the official NHL 2024 playoff team of the Huddle here. So we'll see what happens there. I'm going to do the same thing here for NBA. And I know you're not an NBA guy, so just bear with me. A couple things to note before digging into the NBA playoffs. A couple things to consider. First, like Tony said, it's the overall intensity that increases, especially on the defensive end. And this does lead to a bit of a slower pace, like we see in some of those March Madness matchups. That's going to be a potentially scary thing for teams that have to face the Minnesota Timberwolves or the Orlando Magic, because they are obviously so good on the defensive end already. For example, both play-in games last night hit the under, and we saw some pretty solid defensive performances from the Lakers and the Sacramento Kings, who are pretty middle-of-the-pack defensive teams when you're looking at some of those defensive team analytics. Another thing is that more public betting action is going to come in on playoff games. So it's just important to be a bit mindful of public biases towards teams or matchups and the impact that that might have on spreads and totals or even player prop markets. We know that the casual public bettor loves favorites and they love overs. So that's not to say that faves and overs aren't going to hit, because they will, of course, but keep that in mind and think about timing your bets. Get on a number early before the public impacts a lot of those lines. I also think coaching plays a bigger factor in the NBA playoffs compared to the regular season. Timeouts become increasingly more important. Trying to stop an opponent's run or being willing and able to adjust and adapt to what your opponent is doing, also incredibly important. It's why guys like Eric Spoelstra are some, integral, important head coaches, and guys like Doc just aren't. So coaching, another factor to consider when you're handicapping. And the last one I'll put out there is that familiarity becomes so evident in the playoffs. Yes, there are certain random aspects to games throughout the regular season, but when you get the same opponent in front of you from anywhere from 4 to 7 games in a playoff series, there are no secrets anymore. And one thing I did want to mention for those looking to bet NBA playoffs is something called the zigzag theory, and you're going to see this if you're looking at, Twitter or X or, sports betting YouTube videos. This has been around forever, and the premise is this. You're betting on a team to cover that lost the previous game straight up, in that last game. So I don't recommend just going out and doing this 100% blindly, but there are some interesting spots that I potentially look to. And one of them is when a home team is coming off a loss and non-cover. The theory is that home court advantage is just so important. You've got to win on your own floor. So a home team off a loss, whether that loss was at home or on the road, it also ticks that bounce back spot as well that can make for a good wager. There are tons of documents out there that track this and that, have a deeper dive into what this means, but it can be fun. It can be a fun one to track throughout the NBA playoffs. And I just want to talk about a couple of series that I've got my eye on here before I finish. I like the Magic plus 165 against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Magic, for some reason, still flying under the radar, but this is a high energy defense first team. This series could look an awful lot like some throwback basketball. Real slow pace, real defensive first. I like Banchero and company to get the job done in this one. And then even though the value has completely evaporated with the Giannis news, I like the Pacers over the Bucks. It's around even money now, minus 105 or thereabouts. Pacers won the season series 4-1, and I'm pretty sure all of those wins came before the Pacers acquired Pascal Siakam. And now no Giannis. Doc Rivers certainly has his work cut out for him in this one. So there's more sort of play-in stuff to go through before we know the field of 16. But those are a couple of NBA series prices that I'm looking at.
Andrew, you mentioned I'm not a huge NBA guy. I used to be. I used to love, I don't want to say love, but I used to appreciate the game a lot more than I do. Some of the reasons that I don't, I think the game has changed a lot. It's way more offense, which is frustrating. During the regular season, you've got all these last-minute injury updates, and you put a bet in, and then an injury happens. Yeah. Somebody's resting, etc. The load management stuff. That's frustrating. And my profit just wasn't there in the NBA. And I'm like, I'm not going to focus my effort on that. And because I stopped betting it, I stopped watching the games. And because I wasn't watching the games, I've just lost touch with the game. But another thing is, and correct me on this, I want you to put me in my place if I'm wrong on this. I don't see those iconic matchups that I remember seeing growing up, like Knicks Pacers. Those guys hated each other. And it was fun to watch the Reggie Miller, Spike Lee interactions, Patrick Ewing. And even before my time, before I started watching basketball, looking at highlights of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson and Jordan. I did get to see a lot of Jordan play. But I just don't get excited for these matchups. So can you sell me on the NBA playoffs? What am I missing? Try to bring me back in. Give me a reason to watch.
So there's a couple of reasons why potentially we don't get those intense rivalries like we did in the past. One of them is I think all these stars who eventually come to the NBA, these guys know each other through AAU basketball or high school basketball or whatever. So they know each other when they're 15, 16, 17 years old, probably even buddy-buddy at that point. And so that sort of hatred that we don't see anymore just might not be there. But there are a few storylines to watch. Now we know with the Lakers winning last night, we get the Nuggets versus the Lakers, a rematch of last season. There is a bit of a rivalry there. You know, LeBron, what he's doing as a 39/40-year-old is insane, but Nuggets, the best team in basketball. So there's some interest there. We've got the super team Phoenix Suns against the young and upstart Minnesota Timberwolves, who have one of the most exciting players to watch in Anthony Edwards. Just a monster attacking the rim and an incredible perimeter and even post defender there. So that's an interesting one. The Suns, who, you know, obviously have Durant, they have Devin Booker, they add Bradley Beal. So a bit of a quote-unquote super team, but sort of floundered throughout the regular season. So that's an interesting one. And then we've got the young Oklahoma City Thunder as the number 1 seed. Many people now saying this is the worst number 1 seed of all time. I don't think so. These guys are young. They play the game exciting, going to the rim, hitting three, like just an incredible team to watch. So if they can make a little noise in the playoffs and shut up a lot of these doubters, that is going to be very interesting to see. And then we get the Mavs versus the Clippers. Maybe the best 1-2 combination in the league with Luka and Kyrie Irving. So that's going to be an interesting one. And then you talked about the Knicks. The Knicks won 50 games this year, which is already incredible. So just another interesting storyline there to see if they can make a little noise in the playoffs. But overall, I think what we're seeing in the NBA now, yes, there's an emphasis on the three-pointer and, attacking the rim. And the mid-range game has not become extinct, but it's sort of frowned upon because it's such a low percentage shot. But the skill level in the league right now it's at an all-time high. And the playoffs will bring out some of that intensity that guys like you and I were used to seeing in the 90s and in the 2000s. So those are a few storylines to look at. And I will put it to you, in the preseason, I had the Oklahoma City Thunder over, forget what it was, 44.5 wins. They torched that. So this is my de facto team of the Huddle for the NBA is the Oklahoma City Thunder. So if you want to hitch your wagon to somebody in the NBA playoffs, that's it for me. Oklahoma City Thunder.
You didn't give me the Islanders, so I'm not giving you the Thunder. Forget that, man.
That's fair. That's totally fair.
Quid quo pro here. Come on.
Yeah. That's fair. But like in large part, like I agree. I do miss that intensity that we saw like back in the day. Reggie Miller, I know he's one of your favorites back in the day. But also I will throw back at you that nostalgia plays a real factor in that. And we look at things a bit differently when, we're younger and we're growing up. You know what I mean? But,
yeah, fair.
if you do find some time to take in some NBA playoff games, I'd be interested to hear what your feedback would be.
Yeah, it's fair. I like your point about these guys are friends when they get in the league. They're drafted together in the same draft class. They're hanging out and stuff, so there's not going to be that hatred. I guess I'm a shallow – I don't know. Maybe I need a psychologist to help me out on this. Why do I want to see these guys that hate each other play? So why is that more entertaining and more fun? I guess it's human nature or something. Like we're both 49er fans. When George Kittle does his like tight end camp, right, where he gets together these tight ends in the offseason to work out and stuff, I don't know, like it bothers me a little bit. I'm like, don't help those other teams, George. Don't help develop these young tight ends that you're going to be playing against. And I don't know, maybe I'm too old school in that way. And George Kittle obviously disagrees with me, but I like to see the rivalries. I like to see it as intense as possible.
I do too, but it's just the way that, sports and competition has evolved over the past, 20 years or so. It's just where we're at. And NFL specifically, in the offseason, all these dudes from different teams are training together and they're doing workouts together. And, whether it's weights or whether it's, running routes as a tight end or wide receivers or whatever, all these guys are doing it together. But come Sunday, all that's forgotten. And it's the same in hockey. Like hockey players grow up, especially like in Canada, and I know the U.S. developmental system as well. All these guys know each other, but when they get to the NHL, they can put that behind them. And then when it's on the ice, and especially come playoff time, as we're going to see in those game ones on Saturday, all that's forgotten and it's gone out the window. And, the speed increases, the checking increases. So yeah, it's just the way sports have gone in the last couple decades, unfortunately. But that's just where we're at.
I guess texting maybe has something to do with that too. Like back in the day, you couldn't really keep in touch, and someone has a big game, oh, hey, nice throw or whatever. Yeah. It probably helps them keep in touch after they get drafted, et cetera. So that's probably a piece of it as well. But
yeah, I want to. We're gonna have like a big NFL draft show next week with our boy Ryan Hogue, and we have been talking about football a little bit here, but I do want to talk about the draft, Tony. I know you have. I've got one pick that I really like. I know you have a few, but I also know that you are sort of, now correct me if I'm wrong, you're sort of into creating your own mock draft?
Yeah, it's a fun little hobby. There's a website, the Huddle Report, where people from different sports media outlets compete with each other. I just got my invite to submit my mock draft. So it's fun. You have bets on the draft, but then you also are rooting for your draft to go to script. And so it makes it a little more fun.
So do you have your mock draft done, or do you have, the first few picks in your head? Like, what is it looking like for you, or is it sort of chalky?
Yeah, give me some feedback. I'm going to read you my top 10 here, and let me know what you think here. Okay. I got the 3 that we talked about. Caleb Williams to the Bears, Commanders drafting Jaden Daniels, Drake May going 3rd. At this point, to the Patriots. At this point, I'd be pretty surprised. I think where it gets interesting is that number 4 spot. A lot of people have teams like the Vikings trading up and getting J.J. McCarthy there in that 4 spot. I've got McCarthy going a little bit later. I got the Raiders trading up to 8 to get him. I think a lot of the mock drafts have him going earlier. I got your boy Marvin Harrison going number 4 to Arizona. Marvin Harrison Jr., of course. I think he's just too good of a talent to pass up on. That's why I'm thinking Arizona's not going to trade out of that spot. And then Malik Neighbors, 5 to the Chargers. Giants getting Rome Odunze, another wide receiver, at 6. I got that. This is one I'm a little less sure of. Dallas Turner going 7 to the Titans. I could also see him going 8 if the Falcons keep that pick. Bears, Joe Alt, offensive lineman, tackle there. And then Fuaga, the tackle for the Jets, going 10. So poke some holes in this. What do you like? What do you not like about my mock draft here?
There's not a ton of holes. I'm pretty much aligned with the top 6. Like, I think we're seeing quarterbacks go, and then I think we're seeing those wide receivers go. And I can't believe some of the talk that I've seen about Marvin Harrison dropping, potentially Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze getting picked ahead of this guy. I must be missing something, because I think Marvin Harrison, look, I love Rome Odunze. I think Malik Neighbors is also going to be a stud, but I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is the guy. So with that in mind, with your draft in mind, I'm going to give you my pick, okay? And it impacts that number 8 spot. So, well, one of the picks that I'm looking at is Quinion Mitchell, the cornerback out of Toledo. And there are betting markets for him to go top 10 at plus 250. So that's the bet that I like. And I think I see him going at number 8 to Atlanta. So the reason I like it, and this is not a hot take or anything, I've seen it documented in a few mock drafts, but the Atlanta Falcons have done all of their work on the offensive side of the ball through free agency. And I think what they're going to do now is address some of the holes they've got on the defensive side of the ball in the NFL draft. And Quinion Mitchell, by all accounts, the best cornerback in this draft. And I think Atlanta does have some work to do. They've got some holes to plug in that secondary. They've lost, a couple of guys, I think, through free agency. I think Atlanta is going to tackle that with that number 8 spot in the draft. So I think if I am to pick holes in your sort of top 10 mock draft, like I love Joe Alt at 9. And I see a lot like Fuaga going mocked a lot of times to the Jets at 10. That's the only one I'm going to say, is that I think Atlanta keeps it. And I think Atlanta, because of the position they're in, where they have made a lot of noise in the offseason, is going to address some needs on the defensive side of the ball.
Could you see them getting Dallas Turner from Alabama? You know,
potentially. Like that's the other one, man. Like top defensive guy coming out or to be selected is between those two, in my opinion. So that's a consideration as well, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I see your logic there. If you're like, they're going to take one of these two, but I'm going to get plus 250 odds essentially on the cornerback going. I could see that presenting value there. I think Turner is an interesting case. I've got him as one of my prop bets for the draft. Be really interesting to see where he ends up. Probably the best defensive player in the draft at a premier position. Yeah. I think sometimes like quarterback, and the media shoves this quarterback narrative down our throat. GMs obviously agree. Quarterbacks are king. But good pass rushers are not that far behind quarterbacks, as far behind quarterbacks as we think in a GM's mind. It's a very, very important position. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up.
Let me ask you this. Why no Brock Bowers in the top 10? Because what people are writing about this guy is that, you know, he is all that and more for that tight end position. And I know, like, you talk about things like premium position, like tight end is certainly not that. We've seen some, I don't want to call Kyle Pitts a flop because I think the situation that he was thrown into was a bit harsh and unfair, and we haven't seen him with any steady development. But this guy, Brock Bowers, is supposed to be the next one. So why does he fall off and not go to a team like the Jets at, say, 10?
Yeah, now I wouldn't be shocked if Bowers went in the top 10, but it's really his position. I'm just banking on the fact that GMs are going to not want to spend a top 10 pick. You brought up the Kyle Pitts. I think that's a very good argument. You know, even Vernon Davis, I think he was drafted 6th overall by the 49ers. And he had that, do you remember his combine? Like the stuff that people were saying about Vernon Davis? It was like, you know, he's got the speed of a wide receiver and the strength of a tackle. And granted, he had a very, very, very nice career. But you're just taking a big risk, I think, at drafting a tight end that early. I could be wrong, but if I was a GM, I wouldn't be drafting a tight end in the top 10, personally.
It's tough, but I mean, like, what if the Niners drafted Kittle in the top 10? Do you think that would be a waste of a pick?
Oh, that's a really darn good question, man. That's a good counter argument. I think looking back, you'd have to say no, it wasn't a waste. And if you see that kind of potential in Bowers, you can make that argument. That's fair. But it's like, who else is on the board? Who else is available at that position? And, you know, do you want to be paying a B-plus tight end? You know, what's his floor? Do you want to be paying a B-plus tight end, top 10 money? Yeah, that's tricky, man. That's tricky.
Yeah,
but I will say that tight ends are becoming, you know, more important in offenses. And so maybe you can get ahead of the curve on this a little bit. I'm not saying it's not an important position. It's just a position that isn't typically drafted in the top 10. And so I think GMs are going to kind of stick with that script. We'll see.
Do you think now, and it's nothing new, and by no means am I crediting with, you know, George Kittle leading a sort of revolution in importance on the position, but do you think now, as a tight end, you have to be as good of a blocker in run sets or passing plays as you are a catcher, like a pass catcher? Do you think you have to be equally refined in both of those elements of the game?
I think it's becoming more important. I wouldn't say you have to be, because we see like Kelsey's not a very good blocker, and he's one of the best in the game, but he makes up for it because he's so elite, you know, with his ball skills and route running and all that. And so I wouldn't say you have to, but it's certainly becoming more important for sure. Absolutely.
Give me your, I believe you got 3 picks for us here just based on the draft. And again, we're going to talk about this more next week with Ryan Hogue, but give me 3 picks that you like as we sit here today, 8 days away from the NFL draft.
Yeah, I mentioned Dallas Turner earlier. How about him going under 9.5? And now it's confusing with the over and under. Under as in he's going to get drafted earlier. You can get plus 105 money on that. I think if the Falcons don't trade out of that spot, I think he's probably the floor. You're giving me some questions now with this cornerback theory you got going on. But I just can't see him going 10th. He's just too good of a talent. I could even see Chicago taking him at 9 and having him kind of be opposite Sweat as a dominant defensive end. It's just hard to see him getting out of the top 10. So give me Dallas Turner under 9.5 plus 105. Here's a fun one for you. We got Mr. Irrelevant, Ryan Hogue, on our show next week. So how about a Mr. Irrelevant pick for you? Tight end being the position of Mr. Irrelevant, 13-1.
Okay.
It's more of a fun one. It's not something I have a ton of conviction in. I just see the value there. There's 10 position groups that it could be. You're going to get 13-1 here. The Jets are the team that has that pick right now. They drafted a tight end in the 7th round last year. They don't have a ton of depth at the position behind Conklin, so it's sort of a need for them. I wouldn't be surprised to see them taking it. And 3 of the last 11 Mr. Irrelevants have been tight ends. That's more of a fun anecdote. That's not necessarily a trend that means it's going to happen in the future. It's not predictive. But at 13-1, it's a fun, bet, and it gives me a reason to watch the draft on the last day.
Yeah, I like that.
And then last one here, over 4.5 quarterbacks taken in round 1. There's a lot of juice on this now. I bet it a little bit earlier. Minus 180 now. Some of the value has been sucked out of it, but I still do think that there's value there just because we could see 6 quarterbacks, Andrew, go in the first round. So if you're going to give me over 4.5, you're going to give me that little buffer there. The option year in the contract, this is no secret. Everybody knows this. You get an extra option year. So if you can hit the mark on the quarterback draft in the first round, you essentially get an extra year out of him in the contract. So these GMs are incentivized to reach for a quarterback they may have a second round value on. They're incentivized to reach into the first round and grab them so they can save money on their salary cap in the long term. There's a lot of quarterback needy teams out there, so love the over 4.5 here for that one. So
who is the 5th QB in your opinion that does get scooped up in round 1? Is it Bo Nix?
I think Bo Nix and then Penix would round it out. But if I had to say next, it'd be Bo Nix. It's not something that I have a ton of conviction on, but it's I have conviction that they're going to go, not necessarily in the order of who's going to take them right now.
I just wonder, I know I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know there's a market for Bo Nix over under 32.5 draft position. I just wonder if potentially there's a bit more betting value in that market than the minus 180. I think it was...
Good point.
I think it was Mitch Moss earlier this week. He had to tweet, I can't remember the book, but I think over 4.5 QBs was even money earlier this week. And then it just took off. And like you said, the value was completely evaporated from it. I have, as somebody who watched Washington close, and as somebody who I bet them, I bet them in the final, I don't know that Penix is going to be a guy that is starting on Sundays. You know what I mean? There's something about his game. There's something about his throwing motion that I don't know if it's going to translate to the pro game.
Yeah, that's fair. But what I think is important with these draft props is we almost have to take our opinions out of it. You go back to last year with Stroud and Bryce Young, and I hear all these arguments. It's a separate conversation. It's we can have the conversation about whether or not Penix is an NFL quarterback, but at the end of the day, it comes down to whether these GMs are willing to stretch or not. And there's 32 of them, right? So we only need one GM of the 32 to disagree with us. So that's a practice that I try to get into is my opinion isn't important. It doesn't matter whether I like Stroud or Bryce Young better. What are the Panthers going to do sort of situation,
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point. But like we've said, next week right here on the Huddle with Ryan Hogue, our very own Mr. Irrelevant, we're going to dig a bit deeper into the NFL draft board and find some of those best bets for that. Any parting thoughts here, Tony, before we get into the weekend and we got NHL? It's what a time, NBA, NHL playoffs. It used to be my favorite time in sports, staying up late, watching those West Coast games till the wee hours of the morning. It used to be a blast.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for it. A little bit more on the NHL side than the NBA side, but how many days left, Andrew, till mid-September? Are we there yet?
We still need to get through the dog days of summer when it's just baseball. I mean, we do have Summer Olympics. I know there's not a ton of betting intrigue with the Summer Olympics. We've got Euros. We're going to be talking about Euros soccer competition here, so you're going to have to brush up on your international soccer, Tony, so be prepared for that. But we got a long ways yet, but very excited that the NFL draft is upon us. We've talked about it off cam, but like the NFL has done an exquisite job of having its sort of marquee event sprinkled throughout the offseason, whether it's combine, whether it's the draft, whether it's camps opening up, whatever. Like we know, and as we hit those benchmarks, we're just closer to opening week. So
even
NFL does a real good job of that.
I get
schedule release.
Schedule release, man. That's a big day now. Like survivor pool implications and like, oh, my team's got a short week on week 3 because they play Monday Night Football. Like, when is my bye week? Like, I want to know when the 49ers bye week is now. They got an early bye week? Like, it's exciting, man. I love what the NFL does.
Yeah, it's true. It is very exciting, but exciting times ahead. NHL and NBA playoffs kicking off Saturday. So whatever you folks do with your bets, best of luck. Check us out next week with Ryan Hogue to talk NFL draft. We'll see you in a week. Thanks for watching.